Level infinite! The rain came down in cold sheets, soaking through my jacket as I hurried down the street. Each drop hit the pavement like a ticking clock, counting down to the job interview I was about to miss. My breath fogged in the air, mingling with the steam rising from storm drains. I checked my watch again. Late. If I missed this opportunity, I'd have nothing left but the pile of bills waiting at home. The GPS on my phone buzzed. 10 minutes away, it said. But I didn't have 10 minutes. A shortcut popped into my head, a construction site I'd passed a dozen times on the way to the coffee shop. I hesitated, glancing toward the high fences and darkened equipment. The entrance was fenced off, but someone had bent part of it back, leaving a narrow gap just wide enough to slip through. The rational part of me said no, but the pressure of time whispered yes. In and out, I told myself, gripping the bent fence for balance as I stepped inside. The site was silent. Too silent. Stacks of lumber loomed like gravestones, and puddles of muddy water reflected the faint glow of distant streetlights. The skeleton of a half-built building rose ahead, its beams creaking faintly in the wind. I shoved my hands into my pockets and pressed on, the squelch of my shoes the only sound for what felt like miles. Then I saw it, a massive pit in the middle of the site. Its edges were raw and uneven, crisscrossed with rebar that jutted into the air like skeletal fingers. I couldn't see the bottom, just an infinite void that seemed to swallow the dim light around it. The air grew colder as I approached, my breath fogging with each step. The plank beneath my feet shifted. It wasn't much, a tiny tilt, the barest creak of wood, but it was enough. My foot slipped and the world lurched violently as gravity dragged me down. I didn't scream. There wasn't time. I fell. And then, I didn't. I didn't hit the ground. The sensation of falling should have ended with impact. Pain, even. But it stretched on endlessly, as though I were plummeting through a bottomless void. The sound of the rain vanished, replaced by a strange, oppressive silence that pressed against my ears. My stomach churned as gravity itself seemed to twist and distort. Then, there was a noise. Faint at first, like the hum of fluorescent lights, growing louder with each passing moment. A cold, artificial glow swallowed the darkness, and the fall stopped as abruptly as it began. I landed on something soft and damp. The first thing I noticed was the yellow. It was everywhere. The walls, the floor, even the air itself seemed tinged with the same sickly, unnatural hue. The carpet beneath me squelched under my weight, soaked with a moisture that clung to my palms as I pushed myself upright. The hum grew louder, buzzing like a swarm of invisible insects. Above me, long fluorescent tubes flickered in an erratic rhythm, casting jittering shadows across the endless maze of hallways. My heart raced as I spun in place, searching for something familiar. Anything, but it was all the same. The same yellow walls, the same flickering lights, the same damp, suffocating air. I stumbled forward, my footsteps muted by the soggy carpet. My breath hitched with every step, the silence around me amplifying the sound of my own heartbeat. There were no windows, no doors, just corridors that stretched infinitely, bending in ways that didn't make sense. "This isn't real," I whispered, my voice cracking in the vast emptiness. "It's a dream. It has to be." But the faint smell of mildew and something sour in the air made it hard to convince myself. I reached for my phone, fumbling with shaky hands. The screen flickered as I pressed the power button, the light dimmer than it should have been. The map was still open, but the GPS showed nothing, just a blank expanse. No streets, no shortcuts, no way back. Then I noticed something, the faintest sound just beyond the edge of my hearing. A whisper, soft, indistinct. I froze, holding my breath as I strained to listen. It was coming from around the corner. Slowly I moved toward the sound, every instinct in my body screaming at me to turn back. My hands trembled as I reached the edge of the wall and peered around. There was nothing. Just more hallways, more yellow, more silence. But the whisper hadn't stopped. It was louder now, clearer. A single word repeated over and over, chilling me to the core. Run. The whisper faded, but the word lingered in my mind, run. It felt less like a warning and more like a command, as if something unseen expected me to obey. My legs refused to move, my body frozen by the unnatural weight of the air. Then came the sound of footsteps. They echoed faintly somewhere deep in the maze of halls, soft and measured. The rhythm didn't match mine, and I wasn't sure if they were moving toward me or away. My pulse quickened, my breathing shallow as I scanned the endless corridors. "Hello!" I called out, my voice breaking. It echoed back at me, hollow and distant, as if the walls themselves were mocking me. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of the lights. I stood there, straining my ears for any sound when I felt it, an itch at the back of my neck, a sensation like being watched. Slowly I turned around. At the far end of the hallway something moved, a shadow that didn't belong, shifting in the flickering light. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there, watching. I took a step back, my foot sinking into the damp carpet. The shadow didn't move, but it seemed to grow darker, its edges sharper, as if becoming more defined. My chest tightened as I stumbled backward, my eyes locked on the figure. And then it twitched. The movement was wrong, jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on tangled strings. It stepped forward, and I finally saw it. A humanoid shape, featureless and void-like, its surface rippling like ink suspended in water. Its head tilted slightly, almost curiously, as it raised an arm and pointed directly at me. I bolted. My legs moved on instinct, adrenaline surging as I tore down the hallway. The air felt thicker now, every step harder than the last. The hum of the lights grew louder, the flickering more erratic, until it felt like the entire place was alive, an organism closing in around me. I didn't dare look back, but I could hear it. Those same disjointed footsteps, now faster, heavier, chasing me through the endless halls. "Run!" the whisper repeated, loud and out, overlapping itself like a chorus. "Run! Run! Run!" I turned a corner and froze. The hallway ended in a dead end, a solid yellow wall with no doors, no escape. My chest heaved as I spun around, expecting to see the shadow bearing down on me. But the corridor was empty. The footsteps stopped. The whispering ceased. For a moment, all I could hear was the pounding of my heart. I leaned against the wall, struggling to catch my breath, when I saw it. A rotary phone mounted to the wall just a few feet away, black, old, and entirely out of place. The receiver hung by its cord, swaying gently as if it had just been used. And then it rang. The sound cut through the silence like a blade, shrill and piercing. I stared at it, frozen, as the ringing continued, insistent and demanding. My hands shook as I reached for the receiver. The second my fingers touched it, the ringing stopped. I raised it to my ear, my breath shallow. "Hello?" There was static at first, crackling and faint. Then a voice, distorted, low, and unnervingly familiar. "Why didn't you run?" it said. "Why didn't you run?" The voice sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just familiar, it was mine. Distorted and hollow, but unmistakably my own voice coming through this receiver. My throat tightened as I tried to respond. Who is this?" My voice wavered, barely louder than a whisper. The static hissed in response, then faded into an eerie silence. I pulled the receiver away from my ear, glancing at it as if it might offer some explanation. But the phone was just a phone. Ordinary, unremarkable, yet impossibly wrong in this place. "Hello?" I tried again, my voice cracking. Then the voice returned, layered and broken, like multiple versions of myself speaking in unison. "You should have run. You should have listened. Now it's watching." The lights above flickered violently, the hum swelling to a deafening roar. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear, as if it could block out the sound. My knees threatened to give out, my body trembling as the voice continued. "The walls will shift. Don't let the mirror find you. It sees everything. Everything." "What are you talking about?" I shouted, panic breaking through my fear. "What is this place?" For a moment the voice stopped. The static returned, crackling faintly. Then it said something that froze me in place. "You've been here before." My stomach dropped. No, that's not possible," I whispered, shaking my head. "I've never..." Before I could finish, the phone cut off with a sharp click, the static replaced by silence. I pulled the receiver away, staring at it as if it might offer some answer. My breath came in ragged gasps as I turned back to the hallway. The shadow was there. Closer now, its form almost fully solid. It stood at the far end of the corridor, featureless and still, yet exuding a presence that made my skin crawl. I stumbled backward, the receiver slipping from my hand and swinging by its cord. The lights flickered again, and for a split second the shadow was gone. But when the light stabilized, it was there again. Closer. Too close. Its head tilted, mimicking a gesture I'd made earlier as if mocking me. "You've been here before," the voice echoed in my mind, overlapping with the phantom whispers that now filled the air. I turned and ran, not caring where the hallway led, as long as it was away from that thing. The corridors twisted as I moved, the walls no longer obeying the laws of reality. What should have been straight paths became spirals. Hallways stretched infinitely before snapping back into impossible sharp turns. My own footsteps echoed in directions that didn't make sense, as if the space itself was distorting sound. I rounded a corner and skidded to a stop. The wall ahead was a mirror. My reflection stared back at me, wide-eyed and pale. But it wasn't right. The flickering lights cast shadows across my face, but the reflection didn't move. It stayed perfectly still, its eyes locked on mine. "No," I whispered, stepping back. My reflection tilted its head, mimicking the shadow from before. Slowly it raised its hand and pointed behind me. I didn't want to turn. My entire body screamed at me to run, to do anything but look. But I couldn't stop myself. I turned. The shadow was right there, inches away. Its surface rippled like ink, tendrils unfurling from its body and reaching toward me. I stumbled back, crashing into the mirror. The glass was cold, and for a moment I thought it might shatter under my weight. But the surface held firm, even as the reflection began to change. My reflection smiled. It wasn't a kind smile, it was too wide, too perfect, like it didn't belong on my face. The figure in the mirror raised its hand and tapped the glass, the sound resonating in my ears like a bell. Then, in my own voice, it spoke. "You've been here before." The shadow surged forward. The shadow lunged, and I barely threw myself to the side in time. Its tendrils slammed into the mirror behind me, shattering the glass with a deafening crack. Shards rained down, tinkling like chimes, but the sound quickly faded into the oppressive hum that filled the air. I scrambled backward, my hands sinking into the damp carpet as I tried to put distance between myself and the thing. It twisted unnaturally, its limbs jerking as it turned to face me again. The fragmented pieces of the mirror reflected its warped form, each shard showing something slightly different, shapes that defied logic, glimpses of something far larger than the hallway we stood in. My breath came in ragged gasps as it advanced, slow and deliberate, as if savouring my fear. The whispers returned, louder now, a cacophony of voices overlapping in my head. "Run," they said. "Hide." It's too late. I tried to push myself up, but the air felt heavier, the walls closer. The corridor pulsed almost alive, and the lights flickered erratically, casting the shadow in strange, shifting forms. I had nowhere to go, just an endless maze that seemed intent on trapping me. "Stay back!" I shouted, though the words felt hollow, swallowed by the suffocating space. My voice echoed once, then was replaced by a deep, resonant sound. It laughed. The sound wasn't natural. It was low and guttural, vibrating through the walls and floor, making my teeth ache. The shadow grew taller, its limbs stretching impossibly long, its form blotting out the dim light. And then it spoke, in a voice that wasn't mine, but felt as though it had always been there. "You can't leave." I didn't think. I ran. My legs felt like lead, every step a struggle against the weight of the air pressing down on me. The hallway stretched endlessly ahead, twisting and bending in ways that made no sense. Behind me, the shadow's laughter echoed, growing louder with each second. The hum of the lights surged, blending with the whispers and the laughter into a deafening roar. My head pounded, my vision blurring as I pushed forward. I turned a corner, then another, hoping desperately for something, anything that could save me. And then I saw it. A door. It was small, wooden, and entirely out of place in this endless artificial maze. A faint warm light seeped from the edges, and for a moment hope flickered in my chest. I didn't question it. I lunged for the handle, my fingers closing around the cold metal. The whispers stopped. The laughter ceased. For a moment the air was still, the hallway silent. I glanced back, half expecting to see the shadow looming over me. But the corridor was empty, the yellow walls stretching into infinity. I turned the handle and pushed the door open. On the other side was a staircase. It spiraled downward into darkness, the steps impossibly narrow, the railing cold and rusted under my grip. The air was colder here, heavy with the smell of damp stone and something metallic. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and I was plunged into silence once more. I stood there, staring into the abyss below, my heart pounding in my chest. The shadow was gone, the maze was gone, but I wasn't safe. I could feel it, somewhere in the back of my mind, a presence watching, waiting. The first step creaked under my weight as I began my descent. With each step, the darkness grew thicker, swallowing the faint light above. The hum of the lights was gone, replaced by a sound I couldn't quite place, like distant breathing, slow and deliberate. I didn't know how long I walked. Time didn't feel real anymore. Minutes stretched into hours, or maybe seconds. The staircase twisted in ways that made my head spin, looping back on itself, spiraling deeper and deeper. And then, finally, I reached the bottom. The space was vast, too large to exist beneath the maze. Pillars stretched into the void, their surfaces carved with strange, shifting symbols that seemed to writhe under my gaze. In the center was a single, massive mirror, its surface perfectly smooth, reflecting nothing but blackness. And in the mirror I saw myself, not my reflection, not the twisted grin from before. It was me standing there, staring back, a hollow look in my eyes. Slowly it raised its hand, mirroring my earlier gesture, but this time I wasn't pointing behind me. I was pointing up. I couldn't move, my legs locked in place, my breath catching in my throat as I stared at the figure in the mirror. Me. Not a reflection, but something else entirely. Its movements didn't mimic mine anymore. It stood still, its gaze locked on me, its eyes hollow and dark, as if staring through me into something far beyond. Slowly it lowered its hand, the finger that had pointed upward curling into a fist before pressing flat against the mirror's surface. The glass rippled like water under its touch, sending faint waves across the infinite blackness it reflected. "Why?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "Why are you doing this to me?" The figure tilted its head, the motion slow and deliberate, like a predator studying its prey. And then it spoke, its voice a warped echo of my own. "Because you let me in." The words hit me like a blow. "What do you mean?" I demanded, my voice rising. I didn't do anything." The mirror rippled again, and the figure took a step closer, its form distorting as it moved. Shadows clung to its body like smoke, shifting and twisting into shapes I couldn't comprehend. It stopped just behind the glass, leaning forward until its face was inches from mine. "You've always been here," it said. "You just forgot." The room grew colder, the air thick with an unnatural weight. My head pounded, images flashing in my mind. Brief, disjointed glimpses of places I didn't recognize but somehow knew. A yellow hallway, a shadowed corner, a rotary phone ringing in the dark. The mirror began to change, its surface warping into a mosaic of memories. I saw myself walking through the construction site, stepping onto the plank. But the moment I fell, the scene rewound, and I was there again, walking, falling, over and over, an endless loop. I stumbled back, my legs nearly giving out. No, this can't be real. It's not possible." The figure in the mirror smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was too wide, too perfect, stretching across its face like it had been painted on. It raised its hand again, tapping the glass with a sound like shattering ice. "Everything begins here," it said, "and everything ends here." The pillars around me began to crumble, the symbols carved into them flaring with a sickly green light before disintegrating into ash. The ground shook beneath me, the void beyond the mirror expanding, swallowing the edges of the room. The figure in the mirror remained still, its gaze fixed on me as the world around us collapsed. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice hoarse. "Let me go! I don't belong here!" The figure's smile faded, replaced by something colder, emptier. It leaned forward, its hand pressing through the surface of the mirror like it was stepping through a pool of water. The ripples spread outward, consuming the reflection until there was nothing left but blackness. "You belong to me now," it said. The last thing I saw was its hand reaching for me, its fingers impossibly long, stretching out to pull me into the darkness. I woke up in my apartment. The faint light of dawn seeped through the blinds, casting long shadows across the floor. My body ached, my head pounding as I sat up, the events of the night before rushing back in a torrent of fear and confusion. But the room was normal. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. The cluttered desk, the flickering TV, the stack of overdue bills on the counter. It was almost enough to convince me it had all been a dream. Almost. I stood and turned toward the bathroom, hoping to splash some water on my face and clear my head. But when I caught my reflection in the mirror, I froze. It smiled,